And we are live again.
All right, so before I go to the next item, any questions about or comments about this last little piece that we went over, the presenting problems? A lot of these things, I should say, keep men from coming forward. They're not just the burdens they're carrying around, but because of these issues, if you remember, if I go back one, distrust at the top of the issue. If they can't trust family, how can they trust the stranger? So a lot of men they resist going to get treatment because they don't trust anyone, because they have issues with authority, because they're so angry that they just don't even want to talk to anybody. All of these issues, depression, addiction, whatever, the addiction managed to keep the trauma buried fairly well. So they can sort of fool themselves into thinking, well, I really don't have any big problems, because they're so busy burying it with their addictions that it doesn't keeps them from coming forward. Shame and guilt, they're so afraid that we will see them as being bad or inferior somehow because they have so much guilt and shame. So these are not just the presenting problems that clients bring in, but it's also the same collection of problems that keep people from coming in the first place. No thoughts on that? All right. So building a therapeutic relationship. Now, this is certainly more relevant to therapists, but anyone that's a caregiver, whether it's an alcoholic drug counselor or a trauma counselor, well, some of the concepts may apply to any kind of relationship dynamic, but obviously in any kind of healthy relationship, you need to be able to have trust. If you can't trust your therapist, your family member, your friend, you're not going to have a close relationship with them. So building a therapeutic relationship is, first of all, establishing trust. Now, during the intake, we have a client contract that we fill out. We call it a contract, but really it's more of an understanding. And in that, we talk about issues like you must be on time for your appointment. If you arrive late, the session is going to end when it's scheduled to end. So if you arrive 20 minutes late, instead of getting an hour and a half, you're going to get an hour and 10 minutes, because I may have somebody booked right after you, so I can't extend your session. So if you want that full block of time, you need to be here on time, ready to go when your appointment starts. Another thing is that if you have to cancel, give us 24 hours notice. If you don't give us 24 hours notice, we're going to charge you 50% of what you've agreed to pay when you do show up. We don't want to be overly punitive, but we want them to get the point that they have to be responsible. So we do fine them 50% of what they normally pay. Now, if the client is paying $10 for therapy, they're paying us $5 for a missed session. That's not big money, but if you're on welfare, it's enough that you're going to think twice about not giving us 24 hours notice. Now, we make allowances. If somebody's on their way here and they're stuck on a bus in the middle of the Lionsgate Bridge and the bus sits there for an hour because there's an accident, we're not going to charge them because it's beyond their control. But if they simply fail to let us know, we're going to fine them. We talk about the length of the sessions and the duration. Sessions are an hour and a half long. It's once a week, and it continues for as long as you feel like you need the support. So again, that's another parameter that's based on their need, not on our, it's not based on what we think. It's based on what they need. There's also the limits of confidentiality, and this is a pretty big one, because clients need to know that they come in and they can share with you, and it's not going to be the story passed around the office or passed around, outside the office with our friends and family. So we talk about the limits of confidentiality. We say to clients that anything that we talk about in this session stays between you and I. If I need to share any information with your victim services worker, it's only what they need to know to do part of their job with you, like a change in your address or anything else that they need to know in order to move forward on their work with you. But I'm not going to tell them anything that's not relevant for them to know. And I often say to clients, I know that I could pass your file around to everybody in the office and they would treat that information like it was sacred. But we don't, because we want to practice being careful about information. We have and I explain this to clients too, that once a month we have group case consultation where we all get together. Not everyone shows up, but most of us do. And we talk about cases. But instead of saying, well, my client, Chris Smith, I'm going to say I have a client whose initials are CS. And we'll talk about the dilemma that we're facing, and we would all brainstorm ideas to work more effectively with that client. Now, next month, I'm going to do an update on CS. Now, clients or other staff will recognize who this client is, but they're never going to know that this is Chris Smith. And even when I'm talking with my students, we're working together with the same client, and we still use the initials. But if it happens that we've got two clients with the same initials, that becomes problematic. So we'll have to say, okay, which CS are you talking about? Okay, that one. But the reason we do that is because we don't want to accidentally slip up. If I'm if I go down to Sherry's office, because she's the one right next to she's the victim services coordinator, she's right next to the waiting area. So I can't go in and say, if Chris Smith shows up, let him know that I had to respond to an emergency and I'll be about 15 minutes late. But I don't want to do that because there might be someone in the waiting room who happens to know who Chris is. So I have a client whose initials are CS. When he comes in, check with him and let him know that I'll be 15 minutes late. I just want to practice protecting confidentiality, so I don't want to accidentally slip up. So we explain that to clients, how careful we are about protecting identity, safeguarding information, even when we have staff meetings and case consultation and so on. But I also say that there are limits to confidentiality that legally we can't keep confidentiality. We're not like priests or lawyers. We don't have professional privilege. In other words, under certain circumstances, we have to break confidentiality. And one example is if we are given information that implies that someone who's identifiable is in danger of getting hurt. If we say, if a client says, I know that my next door neighbor is abusing your kids, I saw it one day, I'll have to report that because we can identify who that is. But if he says, well, I saw this family in the shopping mall the other day, I think that they're abusing their children. Well, I don't know who they are. He doesn't know who they are. I can't report it. There's nothing that can be said. The other thing is that if there's no one in danger, if a client says to me, well, this happened actually. A client said that he used to pick up teenagers that are hitchhiking and try to sexually abuse them. Well, he hadn't done that for 10 years. So there's no point in me reporting it because nothing would come of it anyway. And there's no one in harm. He's not doing that anymore. He's not picking up hitchhikers. So, I mean, no one really hitchhikes anymore, to speak of. So there's no danger. It's all about the duty to protect someone from harm. Or if the client says that they're going to commit suicide, as much as I think on some level they have a right to end their life as they want to, I'm legally required to call CAR 81 or whatever it's called, and they will go and they will intercept this person and take him to the psych ward. We are required to do that. There was a case recently with one of my therapists. There was a child in danger. Not our client, but he knew that, I don't know whether it was an estranged partner or what, I don't remember what the circumstances were, but there was a high chance that this kid was in danger. So my therapist, the staff member, reported that. And the client at first was really angry and felt like it was a betrayal. And the therapist explained the legal duty, the responsibility to protect someone from harm. And after he calmed down, he actually said, well, you were right. I apologize for reacting. You did the right thing. But at first there was a big reaction because he felt that she had violated confidentiality. But under the circumstances, she had no choice. The other thing is that if a case goes to court, either our case notes or the therapist can be subpoenaed to testify. And we have to turn them over. If we don't, it's contempt of court and we can be in trouble. So we have to violate confidentiality if our case notes or our files are subpoenaed. A woman at a women's shelter, a women's program one time, her case notes subpoenaed, so she showed up with a box of ashes. Here's my files. Now, I don't think that that went over very well, but she did turn them over. They just happened to have been converted to ash at that point. Probably not the best way to make a statement. I really do think that unless you're protecting someone from harm, or unless your client wants you to share information, we ought to have the same privilege that priests and lawyers have, because if we don't have that professional privilege, then there are a lot of things that are really important that clients aren't going to tell us. They might not tell us that someone is in danger of being abused because they're afraid that we're going to call the police, and whoever we call the police on are going to know that it's them who told somebody that resulted in police showing up. That happened with a family. I had a client who, he was pretty sure that his brother and father were abusing kids. He and his wife were really pretty healthy people. They treated their children well, but there was a lot of unhealthy stuff going on in the family dynamics, and they were concerned about their nieces and nephews. But they were really, first of all, they didn't know what the legal requirement was. Are they required to say anything? And if they did file a report, everyone's going to know who did it. And then they were really afraid of reprisals from the family members. So we called the ministry, and at first it was a hypothetical conversation. And then at one point they said, would your client be willing to talk to us? Because he was in the room. And he said, kind of signal, okay. So they asked him a few questions. They said, well, given what you have shared, you might be right to be concerned, but we have no grounds to take any action because you haven't witnessed anything and nothing specific has been disclosed. But if you get a clear disclosure from one of the kids, or if you witness something, then let us know, then we can take action. So their concern about the family finding out and coming after them was at issue. So what I said, one of the things you can do is get a hold of the children's teacher. Go to the school and say, I'm concerned that there might be something going on in the household that's not healthy. Could you just pay attention to this kid and see if any signs that might be suspicious? Because then if the teacher reports it, they're off the hook. So in all the years I've been doing this, I've very rarely been subpoenaed, probably 3 times that I can think of. One time they asked for my case notes, and I said, well, I don't really keep case notes because my client gives me a whole journal entry of what's going on for the last week. His lawyer has it, you have it. If I turned it over, it would just be one more version of the same thing. They said, yeah, okay, never mind. That was the end of it. So I've managed to avoid having to turn over files, and when I've testified in court, I've been able to answer questions without really saying anything that's going to undermine the client. For example, if a client is using alcohol and drugs, I might just say, I'm concerned about his dissociative patterns. I know what that means. They don't need to know. That answers the question, sort of. I'm not going to perjure myself in court, but if I can minimize the answer so as to not undermine the client, I'll do that if I can. But again, I'm not going to perjure myself because that's illegal and I could get myself in trouble, and I don't want to do that. But when we go over this contract with the client, oh, and one other thing, 2 other things actually. If you feel like stopping, let us know, because we truly care about our clients. When people just disappear, we hope for the best, fear the worst. So if you decide to stop therapy for some reason, maybe you got a job offer or you want to do something else, just let us know so that we know that the decision you've made is a decision in your own best interest and that you haven't just gone off the rails somehow. And the other thing is that if for any reason you don't feel like this process is working with me, do not hesitate to say so. I don't care about being everyone's favorite therapist. I care about you getting the best possible service. If for some reason this dynamic doesn't feel like it's working for you, just let me know. And I'll arrange for you to meet 1 or 2 or 3 other therapists until you find the person that feels like the best match for you. It's all about your recovery. It's not about my ego stroking, you know. I don't need to be everyone's favorite therapist. I need to be the best therapist for my clients. And if I'm not, then somebody else needs to step in. So we make that all really clear, and I think that that really helps clients trust us because we've got some clear parameters. I talk about no smoking as well. There have been times when clients have clearly tried to develop something more than a client relationship. They want to develop a friendship. At one client, because I was working out of my house way back at the beginning, saw that my lights were on around 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. He came to the door and said, well, I saw your lights were on. I thought maybe you'd want to have a chess game or something. And I said, look, I like you. I think you're a cool person. If we had met in another context, I could see us being friends, but I'm your therapist. I think you're trying to divert this into friendship to avoid working on your issues, and that's not good for you. So let's just stick to therapy. He said, okay, I get it. And so that was the end of that. I set that parameter. So I think it's really important that we make our parameters really clear. And another thing is that when clients are emotionally all over the map, when we help them contain those feelings, that's really important, because if we can do what they can't do, in other words, keep a handle on all this emotional chaos, then they feel safer with us, and that builds their trust with us. This person can help me take care of what I can't take care of for myself. I can relax and I can be here. So that's all part of building trust, is addressing those kinds of issues right at the outset. And then we go to assessments, and I ask the client what their issues are, because they might present issues that are really not central to what really needs to be talked about. But if whatever they present is what they're comfortable to talk about. They might say, I have a poor job concentrating, and it doesn't go well at work because I have a job where I'm supposed to be really attentive, and if I'm not concentrating, I'm kind of drifting off. So, okay, we're just going to work on learning how to concentrate, how to stay focused. You know, there's a number of different techniques, the way in which you can sort of stay focused, stay tuned in. But I know that his reason he's not concentrating is because he's dissociating. The reason he's dissociating is because on some level he's being triggered into a memory that he doesn't want to deal with, but he's not ready to go there yet. In fact, I remember one time I was doing an intake with, clinical intake with a student, and afterwards the student said, oh, he's going to be so easy to work with because he's so forthcoming. He just talks so much. And I said, we were talking to the hand puppet, because he didn't want us to get in here where it's really scary and critical for him. He controlled that conversation. He kept it out here somewhere that was very distant from what's really germane to his recovery. So he's not going to be that easy to work with, because he's resistant, he's avoidant. And he's got this busy dialogue going on, and this monologue, really more, not even a dialogue, because he doesn't want us to get into the really critical issues. It's too scary for him. Oh, really? So it was a bit of a wake-up call for the client. And sure enough, that guy, it took weeks to start getting to any place that was really substantial, because he kept staying out here on the fringe of the very minor issues that were really not all that important. I mean, yeah, they had significance, but compared to what he really needed to deal with, they were pretty small in comparison. Client style, I mentioned that, I think, earlier, about people that cry and scream for weeks before they get down to really analyzing, and then you've got the analyzers that analyze forever but have no contact to their emotional life. So we really try to get assessment with their style. Some people move really quickly. Some people are more introspective and more deep probing. So we really work with the client around their style. Now, there's something called neuro-linguistic programming that any therapists know about what that is. But when you're working with a client, if a client says, I really see what you mean, or it looks like to me like, those are people that are very visual in the way they process their stuff. They have got a lot of visual images in their mind that they refer to, or that's their connection. But if a client says, well, it sounds to me like, or what I'm hearing is, they're auditory in their predominant modality of perception. So then if you answer, well, I really hear what you're saying, and it sounds to me like, then you're speaking in the same way that they're speaking, and again, that's going to be a better connection for them. Or it feels really kind of confusing to me, then they're very tactile. So then you might say things, I think that's something we really need to touch on at some point, because again, you're using the same kind of sensory terminology. And that same kind of modality, if you can connect with them, you're going to be more effective. So that's part of assessing their style, their pace, their sensory modality, that's their primary motivation, whether they're emotional as a starting point or whether they're analytical at the starting point. Sometimes you'll see that there's a lot of testing, and if you recognize that you're being tested, then you make sure that you pass the test, whatever the test happens to be. I think I mentioned a client that would show up unannounced and expect me to drop everything and see him. He was testing me, but I called him on it and said, "You're testing me. I do care about you. That's why you get an hour and a half every week. That's your time. It doesn't belong to anybody else." So while he stopped testing and he started showing up on time, or if he wasn't going to be able to make it, he would call in and cancel because I'd passed the test. So those are things you have to work on. At some point, you need to get the client's history. It's not easy to talk about the abuse, and it's not easy to hear it, not until you've worked at it for a while. At first, when I heard these stories, I was just like, oh my God, people do these things to children? I can't believe it. But now, nothing shocks me anymore. I can't say that it's not disturbing, because I still can't, like, how can people do things like this to a child and not have any hesitation? It still baffles me, but I'm not overwhelmed. I'm not surprised by anything I've heard. I've heard bizarre things that make Stephen King sound like a Disney movie, but at some point, you've got to hear about the history. I'll give you an example of why the history is important. I had a client that oral hygiene was a big issue for him. He would avoid going to the dentist. In fact, if he did need to go to the dentist, he would come all the way to, I think, Calgary from Vancouver, because he used to live here and he had a dentist that he'd formulated a trusting relationship with. He just didn't feel comfortable going to anybody else. But he gagged brushing his own teeth. Well, what was that all about? He was orally raped by his father and older brother. So here you are, tilted back in a chair, people are hovering over, they're sticking things in your mouth, you're basically helpless, and it's overwhelming. It was triggering. So there was a direct connection between the oral rape and oral hygiene. So that connection was really important to understand. I had a client that couldn't bear to have his wife touch him in the midsection. Even when they're being intimate, she had to keep her hands away. And he brought that up, and he said, well, people have different tastes in sex, so it's probably no big deal. And I said, you brought it up, so it makes me think that there's something to it. So the next time you're being intimate, allow her to touch you, and instead of recoiling or pushing her away, just stay with it and see what happens. See what comes to mind. So he did, and he got a memory of his parents coming in after the babysitter had gone home and fondling him to see if he was awake. So when his wife was touching him, he wasn't really rejecting her touch. He was rejecting the trigger that would bring back a memory he was not prepared for. So when you start making those connections, you either hear the abreactive behavior and you start getting suspicious about where did that come from, or you hear about what they actually happened. I was orally raped, or I was anally raped, or they groped me and it was really painful, or there was a kid that got caught. This was a little kid, like 4 or 5 years old, that got caught playing doctor with his cousin or something. The parents stripped him down, painted his penis with mercurochrome, and made him sit there in front of the entire family. That's traumatic. Yeah. Thinking that they would shame him into not doing that again. Well, they probably fucked him up for life, pardon my language. So when he talked about that, then it makes sense to me that he has problems with sexual intimacy. That he's got a lot of guilt and shame and just a lot of issues, a lot of baggage around sexuality. Now, when I first started doing this work, it was kind of uncomfortable hearing the stories because it was like I was peering in someone's bedroom window. And I almost felt like a voyeur. But I was at a conference, and there was a keynote speaker who's a big name in the States, Renee Fredericks, and she said that you have to talk about the trauma because that's where the problems come from. If you don't know what the trauma was, you can't resolve the issues. So as painful it is for the client to share that information, and as uncomfortable it might be for you to hear it, you have to at some point. And it really works well because for the clients, because the more they talk about their story, the less shame and guilt they have. I had one client that he was in group probably for 2 or 3 years altogether. He might have taken a break for one cycle, but he would come back and do another cycle. And every time he was in a group, there would be new members, so he would tell his story. And at first it was very difficult, a lot of shame, a lot of embarrassment, a lot of guilt, a lot of emotional, and he could only tell part of it at a time. Now he tells the story, he's gone, all that stuff is gone, the shame is gone, the guilt is gone. So the more you tell your story, the less shame and guilt you're going to feel about it, especially when you get a very positive response from people who really know what they're doing. So people that can say, that's not your fault. You're not responsible. That the offenders, it's their fault. They're the ones that are responsible. I don't know if anybody saw Good Will Hunting or whatever it's called with Robin Williams and Matt Damon. He kept saying, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. He just kept saying it over and over again until finally he broke down crying. Well, we don't do a scene from Good Will Hunting, but where we keep saying it over and over again until they break down crying. But we do work on that issue until they finally let go of that guilt. And one of the ways that the guilt, let go of the shame and guilt, is talking about it. When we keep saying, I think I'm really sorry that happened to you, that should never have happened, it's not your fault, you didn't deserve it, obviously that person has got issues, they're really messed up, it's their problem, not yours. The more we come from that perspective, the more they're able to start letting go of that shame and guilt, and pretty soon it's gone. And I've had clients that have been interviewed. We produce a video, and 8 clients, 6 of the 8 are face on camera talking about their abuse. Now, we told them that these videos are going to only be used for training programs. It's not for public broadcast. We're not going to sell it to TV or Netflix or something. But nonetheless, they knew that a whole bunch of people that they don't know are going to be watching this video, hearing them talk about their abuse, because they no longer have any shame about it, because they know it's not on them. So it's really helpful to for a number of reasons, to work on the history, to find out what the trauma is all about, what the behavior is in terms of a direct connection, and also to alleviate the shame and guilt. We talk about the parameters of the therapeutic relationship, what my role is as your therapist. I'm here to hear what you have to say, to help you unburden yourself from the trauma. I've got a lot of analogies that I use. One of them is that, imagine you've got a pack sack on your back. It's got 100 pounds worth of rocks on it. And each rock is a different impact of the trauma. Now, one by one, we identify what that rock is, and we get rid of it. And pretty soon, this 100-pound weight that prevented you from running and leaping and being carefree is gone. And now it feels like you're on the moon, because you feel so lightweight that you can jump and run all over the place because you're not carrying that weight around anymore. So that my role is to help you free yourself from the negative impact. And also, by being abused, you've been robbed of yourself, of your true self. The offender robbed you of your true self. And so this process is all about regaining ownership of yourself, so that your feelings are yours, your self-concept is yours, your purpose in life is yours, not somebody else's. So really helping clients understand what therapy is all about, how we go about it, what we're trying to do here. I remember I talked about limits to confidentiality, the dual role. I'm not your friend, I'm your therapist. As much as I like you and think that you're an amazing person, we can't be friends. I have to be your therapist. Recently, the cycle of group ended, and one of the men was having his 73rd birthday, I think, and invited me and my student that was co-facilitating to come to his birthday party. And I said to him, I really appreciate the invitation, but I really can't participate in a social setting. I'm not one of your friends, one of your buddies. I'm your therapist. So it's not appropriate for me to be socializing with you, because then I'm contextualized differently. I'm sort of seen as a friend, not as your therapist. And I need to be in that therapy role. And he said, okay, I appreciate that. Oh, well, you guys have a great time. Have a good birthday. But I won't be there. And the student said the same thing. So, again, that's important that we set the parameters on what our role is. We've had clients that come in and they want us to take on other problems. I want you to call my landlord and tell him why I can't pay my rent on time. No, I'm your therapist. I had one client that she had a psychiatrist involved because she had some kind of psychotropic medication that she was on for whatever. She had a social worker that was involved, and me. And she wanted me to go crusading off into the, tilting at windmills on her behalf. And I said, I can't do that. I'm here to help you deal with your life issues, to be able to emotionally manage your life more effectively. When it comes to housing or food vouchers or, you know, whatever kind of service that you want, that's your social worker. When it comes to medication issues, that's your psychiatrist. But in fact, we had a team meeting where all the people working with her got together, and we made it really clear who was to deal with what. And sometimes she was coming to me with things because she wasn't really getting the response from the people who should have been responding. So at this meeting, we just really made a clear division. Okay, that's your role, this is my role, that's your role. And we all kind of, by having that meeting together, we're all on the same page in terms of the well-being of that client. But by being really clear about what our role is, we weren't getting in each other's way. So sometimes you really have to be really clear with clients, because when you've been abused by a teacher, where are the parameters? Where are the parameters of that relationship? When you're abused by mom or dad or older sibling, where's the parameter of that relationship? And I had a client whose father basically used him as free labor, also abused him physically, if not sexually. There's a really complex mess of weird dynamics in that family. So he had no concept of appropriate parameters. And so often you have to work with clients to make sure that they understand clearly what the parameters of the therapeutic relationship are. And the last thing on that slide is containment. And that's about emotional containment. When clients are emotionally all over the place, you have to really work with them as a therapist to help them manage their own emotions. There's something that a term I've come up with, shadow monsters. And that came from the idea that sometimes kids will wake up from a nightmare and they think there's a monster in the room. And they see a shadow on the wall and they freak out. And they scream and cry out for mom or dad. And you come in and you say, that's not really a monster. Look, see, it's a shadow being cast on the wall from this toy sitting on the windowsill from the street light. You move the toy, see the shadow's gone, and put it back, there it is. It's not really a monster, okay? So then the kid can calm down. Like, I don't go with this ferberizing your babies where you let them cry themselves to sleep. That's ridiculous. Why is this kid crying? You go in, you find out what's wrong, you talk them out of it, you say, it's okay, mom's here, dad's here, whatever. You're not alone, there's no monsters under the bed. See, there's no monsters. You got a stomach ache? Okay, well, we'll take care of it. You know, we'll give you something. You go in there and you figure out what the child is bothered by, what's upsetting them, and then you help them sort of figure out, okay, well, it's not such a big issue. So you're teaching your children emotional containment, but our clients have never learned that, and here they are, a full-grown adult with no idea how to control their feelings. They're up, they're down, they're all over the place. And so we work on controlling those feelings. Some of that is addressing the erroneous belief systems. So-and-so is out to get me. I had a client that was paranoid schizophrenic, and he thought that the CIA, FBI, RCMP, you name it, they're all monitoring every moment of his life. And so I said, look, there's no way that you and I can prove or disprove that that's happening. Yes, things like that do happen in the world, that people are being watched. But what are you doing that they would watch you for? I mean, you're not breaking any laws, are you? Other than, okay, you smoke marijuana, and it wasn't quite legal yet. But I said, you're putting your life on hold. You're not, I mean, I think that you need to just get out there and lead your life. If they're watching you, they're not going to see anything to come swooping in and cause you chaos. And meanwhile, you're putting your life on hold. I think you go out there, try to develop a relationship, get a job, build a social life. You're not doing anything illegal. Well, never mind the marijuana. So it's not a big deal. So what if they're watching? And then one day, this was really too much. I mean, I knew this client. I'd been working with him for a few years, so I can get away with being more confrontive. He said, they have moved people into that apartment building so they can read my lips when I'm in therapy. And I said, okay, that's too much. There's no way that they would have to move somebody into an apartment building on 3 sides of this building because they don't know what room you're going to sit in. They don't know what window you're going to be safe. They're not going to spend that kind of money. That's ridiculous. He said, well, yeah, I guess so. I mean, this guy was smart enough that when you give him a logical argument, he's going to accept it. I mean, he would see a license plate. He said, oh, you know, it's a ghost car following me. Or somebody has the same last name as somebody else. Oh, they're connected. Well, you know how many rights are on the phone book? Probably 2.5 pages. I don't know. So unless you've got some bizarre last name, you're going to have a whole bunch of other people with the same last name. It doesn't mean you're all related. I mean, there's just so many examples of his paranoia that really had gotten out of hand. And so I would confront him with logic. And he couldn't argue with logic, and pretty soon now we're not hearing paranoid ideation from him anymore. He wasn't full-on schizophrenic. He just had paranoid ideation. And because I used logic and facts, we've been able to eradicate that whole paranoid fantasy system that he had going on. And that was part of helping him contain his emotional life, because he was experiencing a lot of fear and anxiety because he thought people were tapping his phone and breaking into his apartment and monitoring his every move and reading his lips from a block away. I don't know. So really allowing him to deal with his paranoid delusional thinking allowed him to have more realistic emotional reaction to his life. When he felt upset, it was because something really happened to feel upset about. When he felt fearful, it's because something happened that he should be fearful about. So it really got him from a lot of shadow monsters to something real. And so I tell my clients, when you feel something, fear, paranoia, whatever, scan your environment, your emotional, psychological, physical environment. If you can't identify anything that's truly threatening, then you can say, okay, well, maybe it's low blood sugar or something, so I really don't have anything to worry about. I can just get on with my day. But if you do identify something that truly is threatening, then think about, how can I protect myself? How can I get away? How can I, overpower that threat or whatever, or disempower it? But you have to be realistic. If there's nothing to justify your emotional reaction, you've got to put that in perspective. So that's part of really helping the client develop the ability to contain their emotional life. So containment is extremely important issue to work with clients. Several years ago, I was speaking at a conference, and they had it was in Kelowna, and I was up there for a couple of days, but they set up a session where they invited anybody that was interested. So there was a lot of people from the community that weren't therapists, that maybe weren't in therapy themselves, that really didn't know what therapy was all about. So what is this program that we're trying to get started, et cetera, et cetera. So I came up with 3 stages of recovery that I think really you can break therapy down into. The first stage is the client's history. What is the life course? In other words, if a camera followed them around from the day they were born to the day they walked into your office, what is that camera going to reveal? What are the events, the significant events in their life, whether they moved or whether there was a death in the family, flunking out of school, or winning an award, whatever. Not just the bad stuff, but everything, all the key elements of the person's life. And then looking at family dynamics and social construct. So I used to teach a workshop on overcoming procrastination, and in the process of doing that, I did a bunch of research, and I found a description of, it's been many years now since I did it, like 5 different family types. And I don't remember, I've got to dig this out of somewhere in my file cabinet, but there's a couple different kinds of family. There's the family of high achievers. Dad's a lawyer, mom's a surgeon, your older brother's a professor, your sister's a lawyer, and you're as a barista at Starbucks. No one's saying anything, but all this high-level achievement by all your family members, and you're making coffee at, probably minimum wage. So by implication, you're a failure. Now, on the other end of the extreme, you got families that are a family of dysfunctional people, and they cannot tolerate anyone to succeed, because the more a family member succeeds, the more of a failure they look like. So I use this analogy. There was somewhere in, Central America or whatever, they catch these crabs. If there's one crab in this sort of a shallow bowl, it'll crawl out. But if there are several crabs in there, they keep pulling each other back down in. I think in the process of trying to escape, they keep pulling the other ones down in, so they never get out. You don't have to worry about them. They're not going to escape if you've got more than one crab in this some sort of a shallow bowl. Well, some families are like that. The more you succeed, the more of a failure they feel like they are. So they keep sabotaging anyone in the family that looks like they're gaining any ground. And so that kind of family dynamic is going to have a major impact on the individual. And there's a couple other family dynamics. I can't remember what came out of that particular overcoming procrastination, but there's a lot of things, like is there alcoholism in the family? Is there violence in the family? Now, what is communication like in the family? There's actually an exercise I got out of the Courage to Heal workbook. When dad gets angry, he, fill in the blank. When mom gets angry, she, fill in the blank. When I get angry, I, fill in the blank. And by doing that exercise, you can do this with a lot of things. When dad's depressed, when mom's depressed, whatever, you start realizing that you picked up certain patterns from your parents. And very often children will, their anger patterns will look just like mom or dad or some blending of the two. In my family, my dad and my brother and sister have a very short fuse. Like they just blow up out of the middle of nowhere, whereas mom tends to be passive aggressive. And I was sort of somewhere in the middle. I wasn't exactly passive aggressive, but it would take a lot for me to get to the point where I'd, express it to anybody. But if I did, I realized that I didn't always express it in a really good way. I'd be kind of making some kind of sarcastic snipe at people. And I realized that that's really not working very well. So now my anger expression is really calm, very clear. I'm angry with you because I loaned you some money. You said you'd pay it back at the end of the month, and now I'm short of paying my bills. And now I can't trust you. Forget about ever borrowing money from me again. It's not going to happen. Well, that's a lot easier than, you fucking asshole, I can't trust you, and get out of my life, I never want to see you again. What did I do? I don't know. The person doesn't know. But when you say really calmly, I'm angry with you because this is what happened, this is what you did or didn't do, and these are the consequences, and as a result, these are the choices I'm going to be making. It's really clear. They might try to justify or rationalize or make excuses, but they heard what you said, and they're going to take it in. But if it's swearing and threats and all this kind of stuff, they're not going to hear you. They're just going to throw up their defense mechanism. So family dynamics where there's a lot of dysfunctional anger. I had a client that he described his family life as a viper pit, where everybody was always sniping at each other, and anger was really dysfunctional, and his family was a real mess. What was interesting, when he was first a client, he was in group therapy. At one point, I think we were really getting close to something critical, and he didn't want to go there. So he decided to get angry instead, and he stood up and he said, I don't think much of you and your brand of therapy. This is the biggest waste of money I've ever had the misfortune of investing in. And so he expected me to fight back with him, like his family did. And I said, well, I'm really sorry that this isn't working for you. As much as I'd like to be, the ideal solution for everybody, we can't be all things to all people. So I really support you in making a decision that you think is in your best interest. And if this isn't working for you and you want to drop out and find something that works better, then I support you in that. He didn't know what to do with that. And a couple of the group members said, we think you've really made some progress while you're here, and we're sorry to see you go. I think if it weren't for saving face, he might have sat down, but he didn't. He left. Well, he came back sometime later and engaged in therapy. And again, the therapist got him to a point where they were starting to get to something pretty important, and he dropped out of therapy. And then he came back again a third time, and this therapist, in one session, she broke through that wall. I'm not sure how she did it, but she had him connected with his truth in a session or two, and he stuck around, and she was with him until he finally passed on. And he left us a bunch of stuff in his will. Like there was a gold commemorative coin worth about $700. There was some furniture that he said we could have. We tried to sell some of it. We had a garage sale, got rid of some of it, but most of it we just had to haul off and take it to a second-hand store and say, here you are. We have no use for it. But it was because we were getting close to that really painful core issues that he decided to get angry instead. But because we responded in a supportive way, he kept coming back. He would go away for a while, kind of cool down a little bit, and then he would come back. So understanding the family dynamics really helps. Understanding social construct. People, it's not just Canadian society. There's a lot of subcultures within Canadian society. There's immigrant populations where they have their own reality within their own cultural dynamics. In some cultures, if you know how guys sit with their feet kind of on their, like this, when they kind of cross their legs, they don't cross their legs like women do. They rest their ankle on their knee. Well, in some cultures, having the bottom of your foot pointed towards somebody is an insult. But if you don't know that, you can be sitting there insulting your clients and wondering why they don't come back. This is being taped, right? In therapy, if you're in therapy, you know that cognitive behavioral therapy is a methodology, and it's referred to as CBT. In the gay culture, CBT means something different. Cock and ball torture. So if you have a gay client that says, I'm into CBT, and you say, oh, I've been trained in that, you're talking about two different things, and that could be a problem. So it's important, if you're not gay or if you don't have gay friends, it's important that you do some learning. If you live in a community where there's an immigrant population, you need to learn about their traditions, their belief systems. So that, and even hand gestures can mean something in one culture and mean, where there's a peace man in North American culture, but it might mean, fuck you in some other cultures. So you have to be aware of simple things like that you might be inadvertently insulting your clients. And if you're working with First Nations, it's really important that you learn about the complexity of their First Nations, of the residential schools. Because to talk about sexual abuse in the First Nation school, that's only one part of a very complex problem. They were basically trying to eradicate First Nations culture. In fact, some upper-level Canadian official way back when they started these schools, his statement was, kill the Indian, not the man. In other words, destroy the culture. They weren't allowed to speak their language. They weren't allowed to have their traditional dress. Their hair was cut. I mean, First Nations people, traditionally, they would let the hair grow, both men and women. But they'd get all these bowl cuts. Their clothing would be taken away. They'd be given these clothes made out of flour sacks, whatever. Not allowed to speak their language, not allowed to practice their own spirituality. And sometimes these kids, especially the younger kids, if they were in the residential schools for a number of years, when they went back to their communities, they'd lost their original language. And the elders who never spoke English, the communication between the younger generation and the elder generation was cut off because of the language barrier. And oral history is very important in their culture. So traditions could not be passed on from the older generation to the younger generation because of breakdown in the language barriers, or the language barrier was created by not being able to speak their language and losing it. They were basically training girls to be domestic servants and boys to be manual laborers. And they were punished if they weren't even allowed to talk to their siblings if they happened to be in the same school. It was cultural genocide, pure and simple. Sexual abuse, physical abuse, psychological, emotional, spiritual, you name it, they did it. I was at a conference once, a First Nation conference, and there was a session for men that had been abused in the residential schools. So I went to that session. I said, I'm obviously not First Nation. I'm a therapist. I work with survivors of sexual abuse. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to sit in. They said, oh, yeah, sure. And one of the things that and he happened to be a chief, he said that in the residential school, the kids would fight over who gets to take out the garbage. Like, who wants to take out the garbage? And I don't want to take out the garbage, but I have to because I live alone. I can't get my kids to do it, But the reason that they were fighting over who gets to take out the garbage is that the staff were eating pheasant and vegetables and fresh baked bread and a really plush dinner, the kids were getting gruel. So by taking out the garbage, you might get scraps of the administration's dinner and actually find something worth eating. If you have to dig through the garbage to find something to eat, there's something really wrong with that. But that was just one of the many ways in which kids were abused in the residential schools. So really learning about what they went through is so important, especially for us white Canadians. You know, I did not abuse kids at the residential schools. I did not set up the residential schools, but my race is responsible. And I have to be aware. I don't have to feel guilty because I was not personally perpetrating that abuse, but I have to be aware of what these people went through. It's not okay for me to be ignorant about what they went through as a therapist. I have to know. And I think that that's really important, that we have to understand the social context that our clients come from. And the client's world paradigm is the next point. I've kind of referred to it a bit, but we all form a world paradigm, which is a worldview. This is what the world is all about. When you're abused in the home, the world is an abusive place where people use you for their own purposes, sexually, physically. They beat you on you because they're angry. They use your body because they're horny, like whatever. That's your purpose in life, and that's what reality is. And the bigger world is just a bigger version of your home life. And that's your world paradigm. So if you were lucky enough to grow up in a healthy home where you were loved and nurtured and there were healthy boundaries and no one exploited you, they treated you with respect and dignity that every human being deserves, then, well, that can be a little bit problematic, but not nearly as much, because you assume that the world is a bigger version of your family. So sometimes, without a little bit of appropriate preparation, kids can go out into the world a little bit too naive. And I would say that I had shades of that when I was growing up. I was a little bit gullible. People could manipulate me a little bit. A friend of mine described me and a roommate as my roommate being a user and me being user-friendly. Because I'm too giving. You know, somebody's got a problem. It used to be that if someone says, I'm really broke, I haven't eaten anything, I really need some money. If I've got $10, I give them $10, and now I don't have any money to buy food. And that seemed to be okay with me because, oh, they're hungry. Here, you can have all my money. But then I got to the point where I realized I have to take care of me too. So if someone comes up to me and says, I haven't eaten for days, I'm really hungry, and I've got $10, I'll give them $5. We can both get something to eat. That's just a metaphor. Obviously, I've got more than $10 on me most of the time, or the ability to get more than $10. But it's really, I can't give away so much that I can't take care of myself anymore. What I feel is that we have an obligation to take care of ourselves. If we've got surplus, then I think there's a certain responsibility to share that surplus with people in need, whatever it is, whether it's time, money, attention, whatever. If we've got surplus to give, I think that as human beings, we have a responsibility to give some of that surplus away. Oh, what's his name? His name was eluded me. There's some rich guy who believes that there's an obligation of wealthy people to give away a lot of their wealth. His name will come to me in a minute. And he's trying to get other wealthy people, millionaires, to get on board with him so that they don't really need, you know, $15 million sitting in the bank and have 3 big homes and 8 cars. You know, you can only drive one. Okay, I've got 2 cars, so I've got reasons. I've got my own rationalization. They're both cheap cars, so it's okay. But, you know, what's his name?
Warren Buffett.
That's it, Warren Buffett. He believes that, you know, it's unnecessary to have an accumulation of wealth to that degree. We have an obligation to share it, and he's trying to get other people to think likewise. And I think that that's important. Where am I going? I don't know where I was going, so never mind. Well, yeah, I think that when people have a world paradigm that's based on an unhealthy childhood, they have a lot of erroneous belief systems. Here's an example. I had a client that every day of his life until he left home, his father told him he was stupid. And so here's this guy. He has an engineering degree. He'd gone off to the Middle East to work for some big international consortium. He also owned and operating an apartment block in Toronto from Vancouver. This is not what stupid people do. So he was going on about how his father kept saying he was stupid, and they'd have guests over, and he would say to his guests, I don't know what I did to get a stupid kid like this one. Well, his father was his offender. He wanted to undermine his credibility. If he ever said anything, well, he's stupid. He doesn't know what he's talking about. So I said to him, that's so unfair. You're obviously intelligent. He said, you can't say that to me because I'm not. He got offended because I said he was intelligent. So what I said to him, I'll tell you what, I'll stop telling you that you're intelligent if you stop telling me that you're stupid. And he agreed to that, and that was the beginning of the shift. By the end of therapy, he was able to to recognize that he's actually a very competent, capable man. But that was an erroneous belief system that was part of his childhood paradigm, his world paradigm. I'm stupid, I'm useless, I'm no good. But it was really important that I shift his paradigm to embrace the reality that he's a very intelligent, capable man. So where that original paradigm is unhealthy, we have to unpack that or disassemble it and figure out where did that come from and help the clients build a new world paradigm that sees them in the most positive light, that recognizes all of their qualities. If they have some areas of growth, to not see that as a fault, but as an area where there's room for growth and improvement. You know, I've been doing this work for 30 years. I'm still open to learning. As soon as I think I know it all, it's time for me to quit because I will not be as effective. I have to continue to have an open mind and be prepared to learn. I've learned a lot from my clients. I probably learned more from my clients than my 6 years in university acquiring my 3 degrees. So that is something to really recognize is how does this person see the world? And if it's unhealthy, if it's self-abusive in terms of concept, then you really need to work on helping them build a new and healthier world paradigm. The second stage is freeing the clients from the negative effects. And this is really the bulk of therapy, is where you really get in there, you recognize all the negative baggage that they're carrying around as a result of their trauma. And piece by piece, you help them let go of and discard that baggage. Remember the pack sack full of rocks. One at a time, you allow them to find a way to throw away that rock that is part of that big weight. Some of the ways we do that is cognitive restructuring, and I just kind of referred to that with the client who felt he was stupid. The facts did not support that belief system. And so I said, well, the facts tell me something different. You've got an engineering degree, which is not a walk in the park. You know, not everyone has got the wherewithal to accomplish an engineering degree. You were hired into a really important job in a big international company. People that are stupid, that are barely adequate as an engineer, don't get those kind of positions. You're managing an apartment block from 2,000 miles away. Stupid people don't do that very well. Some people can't manage it from the same city, let alone from across the country. So it's really important to recognize belief systems that cannot be supported by fact, and to really work with clients to embrace a more truthful and ideally positive belief system about themselves. It's a little bit different than CBT or DBT, which are really kind of focusing on behavior patterns that are supported by belief. This is really about what do you believe about yourself. Another example, I did some volunteering at a drop-in center for male sex trade workers. We would feed them dinner 3 nights a week and then talk about issues. If they wanted to talk about something, we were there for them. One of the guys had died of an overdose and they were friends, so a lot of the guys were upset about that. So we talked about that with them a bit. And a lot of these guys were survivors of sexual abuse. What the abuse taught them is that their sexuality is a commodity that could be sold for drugs, money, alcohol, a place to stay. Instead of seeing their sexuality as a way to be intimate with someone that they care about, or to give pleasure to someone who they care about, or to enjoy reciprocal pleasuring, it was a commodity that could be sold. So that was an erroneous belief system that needed to be changed so that they could begin to see their sexuality not as a commodity, but as a pathway to intimacy. Normalization is another big one. Clients feel like they're falling apart. So often I have clients come in, I'm really losing it. And I say, well, no, actually, you're finding it. You're seeing what's been there all along. Another one of my analogies, I got a rash on my hand. Ooh, that's kind of ugly. I'll get some cortisone cream or something, and I'll treat it. I take my shirt off and realize it's on my chest. I look in the mirror, it's on my back. I take my pants off, and it's all over my legs. Then I really freak out. And so therapy is kind of like that. You see your trauma as a kind of a small part of your life. But as the veil lifts, as the dissociation is diminished, you start seeing the big picture. And you see how completely devastated your life has been by the trauma. It can be overwhelming. But when they think, I'm really losing it, I'm crying all the time, we'll say to them, but it makes perfect sense. Giving through what you've gone through, who wouldn't act that way? I would. I was lucky enough not to. But if I'd gone through what you'd gone through, I'd probably be in a worse mess than you are. Your behavior makes perfect sense. Another analogy, you live in a war zone, you dash from cover to cover, you don't stand out in the open, you hear a loud sound, you jump, you're on guard all the time. That behavior makes sense in a war zone. You move from a war zone to a non-war zone, somewhere around here, and that behavior still persists. You're still, jumping every time you hear a loud noise, a car backfires, somebody drops a book, you react. You dash from cover to cover. You don't stand out in the open because you've been taught, 20 years of your life you spent in a war zone. That's not smart. So how do you let go of that behavior? It takes a while to let go of those old abreactive behaviors that helped you survive, but now they're getting in the way of a functional life. So we normalize it by saying, in that context, it made sense. But your life is different now. You're not a powerless 5-year-old that can't prevent an adult from abusing you. You're an adult. You've got the stature, you're 6 feet tall, you weigh probably 185 pounds. If someone messes with you, you can pretty well take care of yourself. You're not a 5-year-old kid anymore. Oh yeah, I guess right. And I had a client that, it was funny, not funny, strange, or interesting. He would get in bar fights a lot of the time. He wouldn't initiate them, but people would come on to him and he'd end up fighting. Well, he studied martial arts. And after becoming, some kind of a belt, like fairly progressed, he never went into the bar fight. He never had bar fights. He'd go into bars all the time, but he never had fights anymore because he wasn't in defense mode. And people that like to fight look for people that they figure that they can get into a fight with. So he knew that if anyone ever hassled him, in about 30 seconds, he could have the person on the floor completely shocked by what just happened and say, okay, you ready to stand up and walk away? Yeah, I think so. And that's the end of it. So he knew that he could take care of himself. So he had not had a bar fight since because he doesn't go in there all defensive and ready to fight. So things like that can really shift a person's behavior patterns. So that's kind of a paradigm shift, but it's also normalizing that his defensive behavior made sense when he was being an abused kid. He needed to be able to defend himself. And that defensive and that guardedness had carried over into adulthood, and he ended up being in situations he didn't have to be in because his readiness to be in that situation helped make it happen. So when he no longer felt threatened by situations, he was no longer participating in the setup, and then it wasn't happening anymore. So normalizing helps people realize that they're not crazy after all, that their behavior within a certain context makes sense. And now we can start changing the way you relate to the world, to people, to situations, and start functioning in a better way. Emotional freedom is really important because, like you say, so many men have been taught that it's not appropriate for men to show their feelings, that we're supposed to be stoic all the time. We can show anger, we can show humor, but that's about it. And humor, you don't want to be too goofy because you don't want to be seen as some kind of a loon or something. So the emotional constraint that so many men feel is really sabotaging the quality of their life. They're not very good partners, they're not very good parents because they're not emotionally present for the people in their life that need them to be. So helping them discover emotional freedom somehow is really important. And we've got some exercises, some activities, some ways in which we can help clients connect with their feeling. But You know, when a female therapist says to a client, it's okay to be emotional, it's human, on some level inside his head he's saying, yeah, it's okay for you because you're a woman. But when a male therapist says that, and they see us reacting in a way that's empathetic, it carries more weight. Now, it's important coming from a female therapist too, don't get me wrong, but it's easier for them to discount that statement when it comes from a woman, because it's all right for you, but I'm a man, it's not okay. But when a man tells them that, we've got Kleenex in the room, and I tell clients that's what the Kleenex is for. Being emotional is healthy. And I said, I don't have a problem being emotional. I've lost people, mother, father, sister, grandparents. I'm not afraid to cry because I don't cry a lot because I don't have much to cry about. But when I do, I let go. It's healthy. We know the reason men have ulcers and high blood pressure and heart attacks is because we suppress our feelings. It's not healthy. We're human beings. We all have a right to a full range of emotional life. And, you know, I'm not saying that they're easy to convince, but that begins the discussion. And then, like I say, we've got some exercises and activities that help them tap into their emotional life. And to me, that's success. When men who have been emotionally shut down for 30, 40, 50 years are suddenly, or not suddenly, but eventually emotionally connected to their lives, that's a beautiful thing. And typically their relationships get better, their self-esteem raises, their health issues improve. We had a client who was HIV positive. He was not doing very well. At that point, we were on the 3rd floor of a building, and the elevator quite often broke down, so he had to walk up 3 flights of stairs. And there were days when he could barely make it up the stairs if the elevator wasn't working. Well, his therapist, who was an art therapist, did a lot of art therapy with him, which really helped him access his emotional life through the art in some ways. And I'll talk about art therapy and how we work with that with clients at some point tomorrow. And because of his work with this therapist, like he had not done any artwork since grade school. But because of the helping this client through art therapy, he started producing some artwork. And within about 6 months, he had a one-man show in Vancouver and sold all his work. The therapist saw him on the street, and his HIV had completely gone into remission, and he was really healthy because he was accessing all those suppressed feelings. And through the art was one of the ways in which he was able to express himself. And he was also able to be emotionally present in his sessions. The art really helped him get there, but he was also able to connect with what he was feeling, to talk about it, to express it. And it really turned things around for him, not logically, but physically as well. When his health took a turn for the better, that was a real indicator that therapy works on all kinds of levels.
We actually have a comment here from the chat. One person commented, so in a twisted way, it's a seek and you shall find, coupled with you find what you fear.
Yeah, actually, that's actually an interesting comment. If you're on guard for something, that's what you're going to see. I mentioned my discomfort with dogs because I don't know what they're going to do. And unless I know the dog, if the dog belongs to a friend of mine and I get to know the animal, you know, I'm okay. He doesn't want to hump my leg or bite me, so, you know, I can be in the same room. But if I'm in a room and there's a rabbit over here, which I would much rather relate to, or a dog over there, I'm going to pay all my time, I'm going to pay attention to that dog because I don't know what he's going to do, and I'm afraid he's going to do something I don't want. And I don't get to interact with this rabbit because I'm paying attention to what I fear. And that's very common. People are drawn to unhealthy people because they're on guard for unhealthy people. So they end up engaging unhealthy people as an attempt to protect themselves, but then it works against them because they become engaged with that person. Now, if you're walking down the sidewalk and you see someone coming towards you who obviously is kind of agitated and kind of like this kind of mood, the best thing to do is just keep right on going, don't make eye contact. But if you're making eye contact, this guy, you're engaging in his dynamic and you're going to get pulled in, and pretty soon you're going to have a confrontation with that person. So I think that's a good comment. It's absolutely true. So often people are on guard for the negative aspects of life, and the good stuff just floats right on by. And the other thing is that when you've had a life of chaos and trauma, I don't know how to phrase this, you believe it. You believe it to be real. You believe it to be substantial because it's always there. And anything positive has come in a fleeting moment. There's been a moment of goodness or of joy, whatever, but it was so short-lived and it was gone almost as quickly as it arrived. You don't trust it. So often people are afraid to embrace something positive because they're so afraid if I reach out, I'm just going to grasp empty air. But hostility and pain and violence, it's always been there, it always will be there. I can count on it, so I'll just settle in and accept it. So I think that's what that person was getting at, that what you fear and what you're on guard against is what you're going to find in your life. And also, you notice what's relevant. I use this example. It's not necessarily about fear or negativity, but let's say there are these two men walking down the street. One's straight, one's gay. They're friends. The gay man is going to say, oh, the universe is presenting me with all these good-looking men. And the straight guy is saying, oh, the universe is presenting me with all these attractive women. But the straight man is not noticing the good-looking men, and the gay man is isn't noticing the good-looking women because they're looking for what's relevant to them. I don't really think that the universe has planned all of our lives, and the universe is constantly handing every single one of us what the universe thinks we need. Like there's several, how many billion people on the planet, not to mention how many billion animals, and like the universe is not presenting us what we need to learn. We're looking for what we either fear or what we hope for. Anything else is irrelevant, so we're not noticing it. But we are surrounded by infinite possibilities at all times. The things that we notice are the things we fear or the things that we're looking for. Everything else may as well be invisible. And if what you're on guard for is negativity, that's what you're going to engage in time and time again. So I hope that answered the person's comment. So that takes us to stage 3, celebrating the emerging person. Now, I think that some therapists end at stage 2. We've eliminated the shame, the guilt. You're no longer addicted to your whatever it was that you're addicted to. You've got better communication with your partner. You've gone back to work. It's been great working with you. Great. Nice knowing you. Bye. But if you don't celebrate the new person emerging under stress, they're going to slip back to those old patterns because they've spent 20, 30 years with dysfunctional patterns. If you don't celebrate the person emerging, you need to reinforce that. It's like trying to learn a second language. I've been trying to be fluent in French for pretty much my entire life. I can get by when I go to France, but I wouldn't say that I'm fluent because my opportunities to practice that are pretty few and far between. Ironically, I'm the only non-Canadian. I'm the only non-Canadian on staff, and I'm the only one that speaks French, Canada's second official language. So all these Canadians that don't speak French, what's going on here? You know, now if I move to France and I live there for 20 years, I'll probably lose my English, and I'll have to relearn it. So when you spend your life with dysfunctional behavior patterns, because that's the only way you know how to cope, it's not enough to identify that as a dysfunctional pattern and maybe introduce something new. You have to spend a lot of time reinforcing these new patterns in order for them to really take hold. Bessel van der Kolk is a Belgian psychotherapist, neuropsychologist, all-around brilliant guy. And he's done a lot of research on neurological programming, our whole neurological patterns. He would do brain scans and see what the brain looks like for a traumatized person, the activity levels and all that kind of stuff. And then after therapy, they would do more brain scans and it would show a different picture of brain activity and so on. So I think it's really important to celebrate the positive things that you see emerging with your client. I have a really kind of interesting example. I had a client that he was a musician. He played the guitar. He sang. We sometimes have show and tell in group. So he brought his guitar in and he sang a song that he'd written. And he played on his guitar, and it was quite nice. But one day, he would bring in his journal, and he was reading from his journal. And I noticed a little doodle in the corner. I said, well, what's that in the corner there in your journal? And he said, well, I was just kind of doodling. I didn't know what I wanted to write about, so I was just kind of scribbling away. And I said, but it seems kind of relevant. So when you don't know what you want to write about, try just drawing something. So he did. And I said, well, that's kind of interesting. I'd like to get a sketchbook, and so you've got some room to really kind of develop that. So he did. And he started doing these beautiful line drawings. And there was so much information in a line drawing is just, lines. And there was always sort of an abuse theme in there. His stuff was coming through, but it was so beautifully articulated. I said to him, and I was not just blowing smoke, I really believe that you can take your 12 favorite drawings and go around to a show because you can get a gallery. These are beautiful drawings. And I said, I'd like to see what you can do with colors. He got colored pencils, still line drawings, but still incorporating color, and they were amazing. And he had no idea that he had visual art skill, but I picked up on it and I encouraged it. And it said, get a sketchbook, try color, and now he has this new way of expressing himself that he didn't know he had before. Had I not picked up on it, had not encouraged it, he would not have developed that new way of self-expression. Sometimes I work with clients and I'll ask them, is there anything that you used to do that you really like doing that you stopped doing? Well, why not go back to it? Or is there something you've always been interested in learning about or taking on that you haven't done? How about going back to that? And one person said, well, I used to play the piano. And I said, well, why don't you now? Well, I don't have a piano. This actually, when I was at UVic, I was working in counseling services there while I was a student. And I said to her, well, the music department has, in the lower floor, they have all these practice rooms, and every room has a piano. Nobody's really paying attention. You can go in there and just play the piano. If someone comes along and said, oh, I had this room booked, say, oh, sorry, I lost track of time, and get up and leave. Well, she came back in the next time and she said, I've been going over there and it's so great. I love it. So it's really important to encourage people to engage in something that's positive, especially if it has a creative, expressive nature, whatever it is, whether it's pottery or writing or whatever. So like I say, we sometimes have show and tell in a group where they bring in their poetry, their artwork, their music, whatever, and we celebrate that because if there isn't a positive life worth living at the end of therapy, why bother? If all you're doing is eliminating the trauma and there's nothing left but a big empty void, who wants that? So it's really important. This third stage is so important because talk about the things that really get them going. That's why I say observing the spark. What excites them? What interests them? What energizes them? And encourage that. I read a really interesting book called The Spark. And it was about a kid who was autistic. And when he was, quite young, basically, 1, 2 years old, when he was diagnosed as being autistic, the experts said he'll never learn how to speak, he'll never function, he'll have to be in care the rest of his life. You may as well just accept it now that he's pretty limited. This is kind of all you're ever going to get from him. She was not interested in hearing that. She was not prepared to accept that as truth. So she paid attention to what interests him. And one day she saw him staring at this glass of water in the window with the sunlight shining on it. So she put couple other glasses with different levels of water and placed it in the window. So he was looking at all three of them. And he seemed to be kind of interested in fridge magnets. So she had a bunch of them. And she would talk to him all the time. And she would tuck him in at night and say, good night, my angel. And one day when she was tucking him in, he said, good night, my bagel. And flash forward at 12 years old, this kid was taking graduate studies at MIT in astrophysics because his mother refused to accept his limitation from the experts. And so as therapists and as parents, we need to look for the thing that excites people and encourage that and foster that because that's where the energy comes from. That's where the self-esteem comes from. That's where the excitement for life comes from. And so it's really important to observe the spark in your clients and really nurture that and celebrate it. Because again, if there isn't this exciting, brilliant life at the end of therapy, where's the motivation for doing all this really painful work? And also this woman, she set up a school. She converted her garage to a classroom and set up a school for autistic children. She called it The Spark, her school. And there was a girl there that seemed to be really interested in baking, so she would take her in the kitchen and they would bake. And sometime later on, I don't remember the time frame exactly, but she helped get her job. She's now the pastry chef at a high-end private club. So she was always paying attention to what excited her students, what were kids interested in, and engage in that with her, with the kids, and feed that excitement and feed that enthusiasm. And so our clients who've been traumatized for decades don't have a lot of enthusiasm for life. So if we can observe any spark of excitement or enthusiasm about something, as long as it's healthy, if it's it's about doing heroin on the weekend, you don't want to encourage that, but no matter how excited they are about it, but something that you deem to be healthy, if there's any indication that the client is interested, then I think that's important. We have an art therapist on staff. We always have at least one. When we have this ideal house that I want to buy, I want to have either an outbuilding or a room that's set up for art therapy where they can throw clay around, they can paint, we can just hose down the floor afterwards, whatever. I also want a vegetable garden where we can do horticultural therapy, where I can go out in the garden and we can pull weed, and every weed is some negative experience that they've had that they want to just pull out and throw away and get rid of. And then I also want to have a bunch of food that a lot of our clients can't eat properly, so why not give them a bag of fresh vegetables from the garden that they can take home at the end of their therapy session? So these are the kind of things I want to do. I want to really encourage people to engage in things that are healthy and creative and positive. So this is why I think the third stage is so important, because if these things become well established, there's highly less likely that clients are going to regress to old self-sabotaging behavior when they're under stress. They'll now have the ways and means to handle that stress and hold on to the positive gains that they've made over therapy. So this is an important part of the recovery process. These stages are not necessarily sequential. Certainly you start at stage 1 and you move towards stage 3, but there's going to be overlap all the way along. You might see that spark early on and nurture it. You might discover towards the therapy that something comes out that somehow has never been touched on, and now you've got some more work to do. Wow, I thought we were done and now we've got this. Okay, let's get busy and attend to this. So they're not necessarily sequential. Pretty much they go 1, 2, 3, but there's going to be a lot of overlap and moving back and forth between those stages. So I think understanding the process of recovery, not necessarily the techniques, but what are those 3 stages, really getting the picture of what is this person carrying around with them, what's their burden look like, and then how do you unburden them, what are the things that they need to get rid of. Now, one of the things that I've been talking about and thinking about quite a bit lately is transmutating some negative behaviors to positive behaviors. Hypervigilance is something that very often we see in survivors are always on guard, but that's fear-based. So I want to replace that fear-based hypervigilance with mindfulness and self-awareness and awareness of the environment. Like I jaywalk all the time because I'm not going to go all the way to the corner to wait for the light to change, to cross the corner, to go to the bakery across the street. So I'm going to wait till the road, till there's no cars coming, and I know that a car could hurt me or kill me, so I don't step out in front of them, but it's not fear-based. I'm aware of my environment. There's cars coming, I'll wait till they go by, and then I'm going to jaywalk. And there's no fear in that process, there's awareness. So instead of being motivated by fear and being hypervigilant, be motivated by self-awareness, by self-preservation. I want to exist in this world, so I need to be aware of my environment and be aware of what's going on around me so I can ensure my safe travel through this life and through this world. And that's a transmutation from hypervigilance to self-awareness. And that's just one of the things that I'm working on to try to take advantage of some of the things that the abuse has taught them. Another thing I talk about is selective dissociation. There are times when you can't be, and it's not a good idea, to be connected to your drama. For example, my kind of off-center humor, when you're driving down the highway at 70 miles an hour, it's not a good time to have a catharsis. So you have to shut down those feelings, not out of avoidance, but because it's too important to do right now. I need to get myself safely off the freeway, either the next exit or truck stop or whatever, or wait till I get home. And then say, okay, what was going on and what was coming up that I need to deal with? So there are times when you need to dissociate from your trauma and your emotional chaos. If you're working with equipment, you could injure yourself or somebody else quite seriously if you're overwhelmed by some flashback or some memory, then you're putting yourself or your coworkers in danger. And you can't do that. So you have to be able to shut down those feelings. I'm at work now. I got to stay tuned in. I got to do my job. I can deal with that stuff later. So that's what I mean by selective dissociation. So when it's the best idea to dissociate from your pain and your drama, then you choose a healthy form of dissociation. Instead of doing heroin, clean your basement. Prepare a meal for yourself. Do your laundry. Do something that in itself is healthy and productive, but it's something that's so engaging that you don't have to think about your trauma right now, because you can't have your head buried in your trauma 24/7. It's overwhelming. It's too exhausting, and it will hurt you in the long run. So you have to be able to take a break, but you should be in control of the dissociation. Instead of the dissociation controlling you, you choose when and how to disconnect from your trauma and attend to some life chore that you have to be mindful of. So that's another thing that I try to transmutate from a dysfunctional practice to a healthy, productive practice. And I'm thinking more and more about this, like how can we take some of these skills that they've developed and change them into a functional skill, not a sabotaging skill. Even distrust, for example, you don't want to go around trusting just everybody. So what's the criteria? How do you decide who's to trust and who? It's okay to be a little bit skeptical. I don't know this person. I don't know if I can trust them yet. But what is my criteria for deciding whether or not I can trust? And I'll talk more about that probably tomorrow. But distrust can be a good thing. You don't want to just be wide open. In fact, I differentiate between vulnerable and open. Vulnerable is like anybody can get at me. Open is selective. I don't know about you. I'm not letting you in. Oh, you're safe. I'll let you in. That's selective. You make a decision about who's safe to access and who's not. So that's what openness is about, is making a decision about who you're going to open yourself up to. Vulnerability is the inability to decide who's safe and the inability to shut out people that aren't. That's what vulnerable is. So we want to move our clients from vulnerable to open. And that's another transition that I think is valuable to make. They already know how to guard themselves against the unknown, but let's give them a criteria by which they can decide what's safe and what isn't. So again, that's another thing that can be transmutated. We've gone over a lot of material today, so I want to kind of go back to where we started and just sort of quickly go through some things and see if anything comes up. We'll just do a quick scan of this one. Substance abuse recovery, suicidal ideation or attempt, intrusive memories and flashback, unexpected triggers, relationship breakdown, life in disarray. Oh, cohort disclosure. I don't think I talked about that. Cohort disclosure is one of the things that bring people into therapy, because we'll ask somebody, how did you find out about the program? Well, my best friend is one of your clients, and when he disclosed to me that he was sexually abused, I disclosed to him that I had been too, and he said, well, maybe you should come and talk to these people. So that's something that we get quite often, frequently, I wouldn't say often, but frequently we get clients that come in because someone they know, a friend or family member, is a survivor that's disclosed to them, and they've sought therapy either with us or somebody else and suggested that they follow up and get some therapy. So cohort disclosure is another way in which clients come into therapy. So I'd forgotten to mention that one when we were over this before. Distrust, issues with authority, anger, depression, addiction, and there's a whole range of addictions. I think we too often think about addictions as drug and alcohol. And maybe we also think about gambling, but workaholism, people think, well, what's wrong with having a career? But when it's obsessive, when you're working 18 hours a day and you have no social life, you have no relationships, and you don't really even take care of your health because you're so focused on work, that's an addiction. That's not dedication. And there's a difference between dedication and career and being obsessive about it. I've been accused of being a workaholic because I sometimes work 6 days a week. But when I leave the office, I leave the office. There are times when I take things home in my briefcase and it never leaves my briefcase. And I get back to work the next day, oh yeah, I was going to look at that last night. Oh well, I'll look at it now. That's not a workaholic. But the job requires that I put in the time. The task needs to be completed, and sometimes it takes 6 days. But day 6 is usually only 2 or 3 hours. I see a couple of clients. While I'm there, I do a couple things, get it out of the way, and I go home. But again, it's because that's the reality of my job. But when I leave it, I leave it. And when I take a holiday, I take a holiday. And once in a while, people ask me, what kind of work you do? And I say, well, I'm a therapist. I work with survivors of sexual abuse. And they say, oh, well, really, that must be very difficult. You know, yeah, well, I spend so much time on work, I don't want to talk about it right now. Okay, and that's the end of that discussion. So if I was a workaholic, I'd be right there and I'd spend the next hour talking to the person until they got fed up and walked away. So, you know, people get distracted by, well, even religion can be an addiction. There are people that spend all their time going to church and praying and, you know, it's God this and God that and Jesus this. And they're using their religion as a way to avoid dealing with their trauma. And, you know, you can pray all you want, your history's still your history. Meanwhile, these people are demonstrating a lot of the abreactive behaviors that are typical of survivors. And, you know, they can go to church 5 days a week, and they still have the trauma to deal with, but they're just not doing it. And that's not to downplay religion, because spirituality has an important role in our lives. But when it's used to avoid confronting the issues that are part of your history, then it's kind of getting in the way. It's great to have religion as a support while you're doing the work that you need to do, but it's not a replacement for the work that you need to do. And so I think that that's something that's valuable to be mindful of. And the next additional issue, dissociation, distorted boundaries. When I get on to some of the treatment methodology that we use, I can make more sense out of issues like distrust and boundary distortion and identity ambiguity, because they all go together. But without talking about the therapeutic intervention that I use for that, how they fit together may still be a little bit vague, but they are relevant. And I differentiate between sexual orientation and gender identity. And I don't think I talked about this. Gender identity is, what does it mean for me to be a man in North American culture? How am I supposed to walk, move, dress? You know, is it okay for me to show up to work in makeup and a dress? In Vancouver, it's okay because diversity's, you know, kind of, but it's not okay for me, and I'm sure my staff would be shocked, you know, and it has no relevance to me. You know, I'm comfortable with who I am. I don't need to wear a dress or, you know, wear high heels or anything. But gender identity, there are expectations, and some of them are negative. Men are supposed to be stoic. I don't buy it. But there are assumptions about men. If you're a male hairdresser, the assumption is that you're gay. They're not all. If you're a woman and you're a heavy equipment operator, oh, you must be a lesbian. Well, some are, but not all of them. So we make a lot of assumptions about people, because women are supposed to be frilly and, you know, nurturing and, you know, run daycares and have flower shops and those kinds of things. But what if they want to be a truck driver or a firefighter or join the military? Shouldn't they have that same opportunity as anybody else? What if a man wants to be a ballet dancer or a hairdresser or a preschool worker? Shouldn't they have the same right as anybody else to do those kinds of jobs? But in our society, there's a lot of parameters. Men are really fearful of intimacy with other men. And I'm not even talking about sexuality. To even say to your guy friend, you know, I really love you, buddy. You know, you've been a best friend. You've always been there for me, and I really love you. Some guys are really afraid of that kind of a discussion. They're not talking about sex. They're not talking about rubbing body parts. They're talking about, you're loyal. I know you care about me and I care about you, and that's a good thing. Why can't we say that? You know, some people think that after the age of 12, you're not supposed to hug your father. I hugged my father until the day he died, and I'm glad because, you know, we love each other. You know, there's nothing inappropriate about our relationship. It was a very healthy relationship. I come from a really good family, fortunately, you know. But there's no reasons why people can't express their feelings for each other, but men are so hung up about it. But in some cultures, you will see men walking along holding hands. They're not gay. They're not even, they're completely straight, but they're good friends. So for them to hold hands, walking along in, you know, Middle Eastern cultures or something, is not a big deal. But in our culture, oh, men can't do that. Oh, you know, that's weird. Men can't do that. So we have to be aware of the restrictions that we have that determine how we're supposed to be. Now, gender identity has nothing to do with who you're attracted to. That may also be going on. I mean, you're attracted to men or women or both. But gender identity is, as a woman, how are you supposed to behave in culture? As a male, how are you supposed to behave in our society? You know, and there's a lot of restrictions for both men and women in terms of what's acceptable behavior for us. So I think it's really important to separate the idea of gender identity from sexual orientation, because some men feel like, if I'm crying, I'm kind of a femme and that must mean I'm gay. No, it means you're human. It means you're connected to your own reality, to your own personal truth. And that's really nothing to do with orientation. And I think for a lot of clients, for survivors, it's really important to separate those concepts out, because they can explore what it means to be a man and embrace a broader definition without being worried about being labeled as gay. Because it doesn't mean you're gay just because you're okay about crying when something tragic happens. You know, your best friend gets killed in a car accident. Are you supposed to say, oh, my best friend just got killed? No, I'm going to miss him. Anything good on TV? No, I mean, that's unhealthy. So it's like, you know, I'm kind of choked up because my best friend just got killed in a car accident. He was so important to me. We were best friends, and now he's gone, and it's taking me some time to get over it. That's healthy. That's good. That's important. And we have a right to that. And so men have to be able to be given permission to have a broader definition of what it means to be male. Just like women they have a right to be strong and self-empowering and independent. You know, those are the things that the women's movement have been fighting for. And good for you. You have a right to be independent, to be strong and be resourceful, and not be dependent on men to help you make your life work. So women have addressed that narrow parameter. You have to be the housewife, you know, in the little house coat, you know, making sure that dinner's ready for your husband and kids. There's more to life than just being a live-in servant. You know, and women have fought for that, and I think it's time men fought for a broader definition of what it means to be male. And you don't have to worry about being labeled as gay just because you take on a broader definition. Well, if you are gay, that's fine, you know, take it on and celebrate it. But just because you're allowing yourself to cry or to be vulnerable doesn't suddenly mean that you're gay when all this time you thought you were straight. You know, they are separate issues, and it's important that we separate them out. So I think I'm belaboring that issue a bit because it's a big one with our clients, because that is confusing for a lot of them.
I just have a comment on concerning that, about like the whole like being affectionate between a man and a man, but not on any sexual, just on a relationship level.
Yeah.
And I will admit, even association through my family, as a female, I was taught that should not happen with two men.
Yeah.
And that when I married my husband, he came from a family of very strong female background. So hugging and kissing was very accepted in their family. So getting to know my husband in the first few years, he willingly would reach out to a guy friend and touch his shoulder or give him a hug. And I instantly would go, you're gonna get beat up. That's how I was taught.
Yeah.
If you're touchy-feeling, you're just hugging this guy, you're gonna get punched in the face.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to understand that that's not right. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? That I had to change my opinion. But I got taught that from my other
Yeah.
female family members.
Yeah.
That men do not treat like, only we do that to each other,
Yeah.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I even had to teach myself that that's not necessarily right.
Right.
In 12 years we've been married, he's never been punched in the face. And he's still the same man.
Yeah.
Okay? He hasn't changed, he still likes to hug, but he's not hugging people on the street, right?
Yeah.
I have a very long time friend of 25 years who's a big burly man, right? Within hours of knowing each other, he hugged my husband. And I'm like, whoa! Like you're dealing, I was like, you're dealing a very hard, roughneck man. And you managed to slip in there and make him feel comfortable enough to give you a hug.
Yeah.
So it impressed me
Mhm.
that the diversity of families and
Oh, yeah.
how they teach you to interact publicly
Yeah.
is a big influence on your life, right? Because,
Yeah.
like I said, instantly I was like, "You're gonna get punched in the face. You shouldn't be doing that." He's like, "Oh, what are you talking about? I've never been punched in the face for being friendly."
Yeah.
And then that was it. Friendly,
Yeah.
not sexual, not being a homosexual. Has
Yeah.
nothing to do with physical body. It's just a matter of
It's an emotional
interacting
expression,
and
yeah.
being a human being. Like
Yeah.
you said. So I just thought I'd point that out. Because
Yeah, I think that that's a really good example. And it is, you know, again, family dynamics set you up to behave a certain way. In my family, we were kind of a huggy family as well. You know, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, we all hug each other, hello and goodbye. We're not sitting around, you know, hugging each other all day, but, you know, when it seems relevant, we give each other a hug. And we're still like that. And so now, in my adult life, you know, we have a board of directors meeting and we'll hug each other hello when we all sit down and do our board meeting and hug each other goodbye. You know, like we're mindful of who may or may not be uncomfortable with that. So we don't impose ourselves on each other, but you kind of get the sense that there's a mutual, you know, emotional kind of hugging energy going on. My mother used to say to kids, and we would challenge her about it. Actually, a friend of mine too would say to their kids, "Give your uncle a hug." And I'd say, "No, they don't have to give me a hug unless they feel about it. Quit telling them that they have to give me a hug. If they want to hug me, they will. If they don't want to, they don't have to." And I would say that right in front of the kid, because it's important that their rights be respected. And you don't have to force people to hug, nor do you deny them the opportunity to hug if they feel like it. As long as it's reciprocal and someone's not uncomfortable with being hugged, then, you know, hug away. Mm-hmm. So, this was the next cell, the establishing the relationship, the therapist dynamic. Any thoughts or comments on this particular section? We've got caregivers in the room, so I don't know if this all fits for you, if there's something you have to add or subtract. I think with an organization, we have a lot more structure. And, you know, we've got paperwork, we've got forms, we've got policies and procedures. If you're a private practitioner, you're not burdened down by these policies and procedures because it's more of a one-to-one kind of relationship. But you still have to have some kind of parameters and some kind of boundaries so that clients know what to expect. You're not going to help them wash their car or babysit their kids. But it's not as burdensome. When you work with an agency, we've got client case numbers, we've got all kinds of policies and procedures to make sure that we gather the stats that we need, that we can track our financial data. All that stuff is important when you work for an organization. There are organizational demands that are different from a private practitioner, but still there are parameters that need to be established. And the clearer you can be about your parameters, the safer as clients is going to be working with you. So if you're too ambiguous and too loosey-goosey, well, kind of whatever happens is cool, that's too disconcerting for clients. So you have to have some kind of implication of parameters that help the clients know what their role is and how they're expected to behave and how they can count on you behaving. And when they know that everything is pretty well clear and established, they're going to relax and say, okay, I can do this, I can be here. So everyone needs to have some kind of parameters of the therapeutic relationship, which is one of the bottom items. the 3 stages of recovery. Is this something that people have really thought about before, or do you see it as a therapy as sort of a linear process that begins and ends eventually? Or have you also thought about it as having very distinct components?
I think it's distinct components and phases,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not just linear, right? They
Yeah,
switch back, they go back and forth,
yeah.
without doubt, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's establishing rapport and relationship and building the alliance, which is sort of the bedrock
Yeah,
therapy from there, and then you do the work and the processing that's shaped for the client,
right,
right? Whatever, if you're using emotions or narrative
right.
or other styles of therapeutic intervention. And there's always a consolidation piece or celebration piece,
Yeah.
right, where you help them restory their life and get new meaning and purpose,
Mm-hmm.
that then they can go forward and celebrate.
I think, I don't personally, I didn't study narrative therapy, but I'm the executive director and a couple of our staff are very much into narrative therapy. And what I get from that is that growing up in a traumatic lifestyle, you develop a very messed up negative narrative about, I use the word world paradigm, but it's basically, what is the story that you tell yourself about you, your life, the world around you, your existence? And where that's negative and self-sabotaging and sort of a dead-end attitude about life, you need to write a new narrative where your new story talks about possibilities and a more positive view of the self and a more positive view of the potential for relationships. It doesn't have to be arguing in chaos and competition for control. It can be a cooperative relationship of mutual respect. So a new narrative is about that. It's building a new world paradigm. That's the word I use, but it's basically the same thing. A new story. What's a new story that you're going to tell about your life? And so the one person I went up to the Yukon with is very much into narrative. So he uses that word a lot about what kind of narrative are you building for yourself? Or what kind of narrative are you living with? And how does that need to be changed? And so, where you're writing a new story is about identifying and celebrating a new version of who you are. And that is so important to reinforce that before they backslide into something that's been familiar for 20 or 30 years.
Yeah, we do that in our intake focus fit, so that's part of us at the first meeting.
Oh, yeah.
And talking with the people about, or the person rather, about how stories, we tell ourselves stories about who we are, and others tell them to us about who we are, and that dramatically affects how we live our life.
Right.
And sometimes that story doesn't fit or work anymore, or it needs to change, or you think it needs to change.
Right.
So if we restore your life.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that people will get that, right?
Right.
Rather than some type of therapeutic focus, quote stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
We all do pretty much the same thing. We may label it differently, but it's all pretty much the same thing. This is the last cell I want to talk a little bit about. My agency works with male victims of domestic violence, and you're probably mostly all aware of the battered wife syndrome. We've all heard that. It should be called the battered spouse syndrome because it's pretty much the same. Men who are victims of domestic violence from a female partner, probably the same thing with a gay partner, but then they've got social baggage that gets thrown in there as well. But ambivalence about leaving. It's uncomfortable to stay. They care about their partner, but they're fearful about their partner. They don't like the abuse, but they can't. So they're really ambivalent about leaving. They don't know if they're going to leave or stay. They keep hoping it's going to get better. They're blamed by the partner, and they think, well, yeah, if I only clean up my act, if I only behave better, then the beatings will stop. That's the same thing that battered wives talk about. The partner blames the battered spouse, the battered male, for everything that's wrong. If you weren't such a loser, if you weren't such a fuck up, if you weren't such a this and that, our life would be a whole lot better. I'm so fed up with you, blah, blah, blah. It's all about the abused partner. It's their fault that everything is chaotic and wrong. Partners who are abusers can be controlling in their behavior. Very often they control the finances. Paychecks have to be turned over to the battering partner. And it can work either gender, it doesn't matter who. It's the batterer that's got control. The batterer can prevent their husband from having relationships, sometimes just with family. She doesn't want you to have anything to do with your family because the family doesn't like you, so you're going to keep the husband from seeing his own family because they're just going to talk bad about you. Actually, they're going to talk the truth, and that's not okay. So some people will not let their spouse go anywhere without knowing where they're going or going with them, and will curtail any activity that they don't think is appropriate. You can go to work, but you can't have a social life because I don't know what you're up to, and I don't want you doing anything that I don't want you to do.
24/7. 24/7.
Yep, 24/7. It's all the time. You're constantly being monitored. And if you can't be monitored, you can't go where you can't be monitored. So that doesn't work. Abuse can be physical, emotional, and psychological. It can be all three. Where it's physical, it's different because you can see it. You can see the bruises or the cuts or whatever. You can feel it. There it is. And you can see it healing. But the psychological and emotional, it's in there somewhere where you can't even often identify it, where your self-esteem is being constantly eroded. Where do you find it? Where do you identify it? It's always a bit more ambiguous. And sometimes as a clinician, it's harder to root that out. You can see the physical harm, but you have to really pay attention to see the psychological and emotional harm. But it's there, and it's very often all three. We've got a client who, he's from Germany, and he has a partner, and they have a child, but they're estranged. She's got all the money. She's in a really comfortable situation. She's insisting that he pay child support, which he doesn't mind doing, but because he's a landed immigrant, or I'm not exactly his status, it's not my client, I'm consulting with one of my staff who's working with him. He's limited, but he actually, what is he? He's either a lawyer or something in Germany, but he can't practice here because he hasn't had local training. So instead he's working in a restaurant as a dishwasher. And I think he maybe gets some kind of subsidized income or whatever, and so he can only earn X amount of dollars, or it gets deducted from his support money, or the social assistance or whatever it is that he's getting. But he puts the money, the support money, into a bank account that she has access to, but she doesn't take it out. She said, he's not giving any money. Well, I said, do you have bank deposits showing that you've deposited? And he said, well, yes. And I said, make sure you take that to court and say, look, I put that money in. She's not taking it out. So when she says he's not giving me money, I am. She's just not accessing it. And then saying, oh, you know, I have to get by on nothing. Well, she's living quite nicely and making it all look like he's the bad person.
Gaslighting them.
Yeah, gaslighting, exactly. There's lots of that going on. So the thing that really gets to me is the impact on children. In so many of these instances, decisions are not based on what's best for the children. And let's face it, the truth of the matter is that women will always have an advantage in custody and those kinds of disputes, because there's this pervasive view that children should be with their mother, because traditionally we've seen mothers as the nurturers, as the predominant caregiver. And, you know, back a couple decades, you would more often women would be home with the children and the husband's out going to work. So yes, they were the predominant caregiver. And so the system hasn't caught up to contemporary reality. Women are working as often as men are. And there are some men that stay home with the children. I've got a client, he's got 5 kids. The mother is clearly neglectful. She's not abusive, but she's neglectful. She'll leave the kids home alone, and she'll go off to do whatever she wants to do. When he has the kid, he has a nanny present because he's got a fairly well-paying job, so he can afford a nanny. When he's not home to take care of the kids, there's a nanny there taking care of them. And he pays attention to the kids. He spends time with the kids. The mom doesn't seem to want to be bothered, but she wants to make a big case out of, she wants the kids, she wants the 2 younger kids to live with her, and then she wants the 14-year-old to live with her too. Not because she's interested in having the 14-year-old around, because she really wants to relate with her, but she wants to live in babysitter. She wants the 14-year-old to take care of the little kids so she can go off and do whatever she wants to do.
Which is not uncommon.
Right.
My brother has custody over his oldest child, and the ex is livid, right? Because she has 2 younger children. He's 13 years old. And child can't have access to home anyways for other reasons.
Yeah.
But she's pissed because now she has to find other arrangements to go off and do her own personal things, which is pretty much 90% of her day, right?
Yeah.
Instead of 90% of her time going towards her children, she forces them on other people,
Yeah.
including the oldest son, no longer, and it happens. It's been
Yeah.
going on for years, right?
Yeah.
So I personally have seen the effects that it's done on my 13-year-old nephew.
Yeah.
He shouldn't be responsible for 7 hours a day while mom goes off and gallivants around the city.
Yeah. And that's the case with my client with the 5 kids. Their relationship ended because she was having affairs. So she was off with her boyfriend of the week or whoever it was, and leaving the kids sometimes with a nanny, sometimes alone with the older kids, being expected to take care of the younger kids. And then she wants the husband to support her in grand lifestyle while she can go off and do whatever she wants, and he's the primary caregiver for his kids. She wants the kids to move to a different school where they don't have any friends. And he's trying to honor the kids. You know, the kids want to stay in school where they've got friends, where they've been in this school for years, and it's closer to him. And she...
Isn't that a basic argument when it comes to the women fighting for custody? Because I've heard in many cases where the father wants to have 50-50 access, but isn't granted it because it would disturb the child's normal lifestyle.
Yeah.
Right? And a lot of fathers are willing to do the travel, willing to drive the kid to school, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the courts don't even see it that way.
Yeah.
They're not seeing the efforts that men are trying to make
Right.
to maintain normality for their child,
Yeah.
to keep them in the same school. So she's trying to destroy what they would offer her in the beginning if she had full custody.
Yeah.
Which just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I think that it's really important that they look at the reality of any particular family dynamic and make a decision that's best for the child. Not best for the ego of one party or the other, one parent or the other, but what is really best for the children. And what really irks me is when people decide that their relationship's over, they get their respective lawyers, and the lawyers nurture hostility. I was working with a family. They started coming in because the 10-year-old boy had been abused, and I was working with him, but when they came in, it turned out that mom and dad were also victims of sexual abuse. So I'd spend a half a day with the family. I'd see each one of them individually, and then we'd have a session, all of us together. Well, they had a lot of problems in their relationship, and finally they decided to call it quits. So they would show up for therapy. They'd all still show up on Saturday when we would all get together. And they would be kind of hostile because they had been meeting with their respective lawyers. We would have a session, we'd address some of the issues, we'd work out a bunch of stuff. I would see the two of them, the mom and the dad, hug each other goodbye, get into their cars and drive away because we'd resolved the hostility. Next week they'd come back all hostile and angry because the lawyers had gotten a hold of them. Lawyers capitalize on hostility. What I really think they should have is a neutral mediator, that when a relationship falls apart, the neutral mediator will look at what's best for the kids, look at the financial reality, look at the dynamics, and make a decision that's healthiest, and then to resolve a transition into a new family dynamic where mom's here, dad's here, and the kids are wherever, whatever's going to be best for them, whether it be 50-50 or predominantly in the care of one or the other. Instead, there's not going to be all this hostility, but a peaceful resolution to the restructuring of the family dynamic, because as long as these kids exist, these parents are going to be connected. They can divorce and they can marry other people, But when the kids graduate from high school, they both want to be there. When the kids graduate from university, they both want to be there. When the kids get married, they both want to be there. When the first grandchild comes along, they both want to be there. So why not find a peaceful resolution where they can all accept this transition into another form of connectedness? Because I don't believe relationships end, they evolve. And if you can accept the evolution of this relationship and find a peaceful way to enter into this new relationship dynamic, and I've worked with a lot of people that were splitting up, and they end up on a friendship level. They accept the fact that they have decided that they need to go their own separate way, but they've done so with mutual respect. In fact, one couple said, we've decided to break up because we can't get healthy if we stay together. We're going to keep each other stuck. We love each other too much to stay together. So their separating was an act of love. Whereas if you had lawyers involved with that, they would have them sniping and hating each other because they make more money that way. I just think it's wrong.
Well, I have one comment when you were talking about how the system feels that sometimes the child is best suited with the mother because she's more nurturing. To what age, though, right? Because I do believe that both children need to have a balance between both parents, right?
Yeah.
The influence of the masculinity of the father and the femininity of the mother is an important value for any child to grow up and have
Right.
for social reasons, for emotional reasons. But at what age? I understand in the coddling era, the mother, yes, should be around the child more, especially after separation.
Yeah, but
But
that's
to
the
what
tradition.
age, right? Because the system doesn't divide
No.
that line. They
No,
don't
it doesn't. But I
decide.
don't think that it's age either, because I did not have the fortune of having kids of my own, but my sister's 2 sons are really important to me, and I actually helped deliver the younger one. He was born at home. So when my sister had contractions, I'd be pressing on the small of her back, which would reduce the pain. We got so in sync that when the contractions ended, I would just sort of sit there and gaze out the window, and she'd kind of drift off to sort of a semi-sleep state. And I just knew it was time to start pushing, and I'd start pushing on her back the very same moment that the contractions would start. We were so in sync. And at one point, she got up to go to the bathroom, and she said, "The baby." So we quickly rushed around. She sat down on the floor, leaned back against me. The baby popped out, and they handed the baby to me because they needed to get her back to bed. So I took him into the room. I wiped him off. I weighed him. I diapered him. I swaddled him. I held him for a while. And at one point, I gave him back to my sister so she could breastfeed him because that would stimulate the contractions to deliver the placenta. And the 3 nights of his life, he slept on my chest. And I'm really close to this nephew. He's just a wonderful guy. He's 40 years old now. We spend our holidays together. Unfortunately, his mom passed away about 10 years ago. His biological father is kind of around, kind of not. So I've been the consistency in his life from the moment he was born. I was the first person that he bonded with, and I'm still around. And I've been part of his life the whole way through. So I was a nurturing male in his life, and that I don't regret a moment of it, and nor does he. And I think it was healthy. So nurturing is not the purview of one gender. It's the willingness of either parent to be there to nurture. Some men is, oh, I don't change the diapers. Oh, they hand them the wife. Don't you love your baby? Don't you want to take care of him or her? Don't you want to make sure he's in a clean, dry diaper? Don't you want to feed him when he's hungry? Like this idea that it's not my job because I'm the male, like that's bullshit. You know, we're not hunter-gatherers anymore.
And I think that would be a good note to stop today.
Okay, good. So let's wrap up.